My own father stood up in court and told the judge I was a drug addict. He said I had been one since I was 19. He said I shouldn't be allowed near my grandfather's estate, let alone inherit it. I sat there in the Hartford County Probate Court on a Tuesday morning in late October wearing the cardigan my grandfather had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, and I didn't say a word. The judge was a woman maybe in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the kind of patient face you see on women who have heard every lie a person can tell. She listened to my father's attorney finish his opening. Then she turned, slowly, with that small tilt of the head I had come to recognize over the years, and she asked him a question that made the entire room go still. "Counselor, are you certain you understand what your client's daughter does for a living?" My father's attorney blinked. He looked at his notes. He looked at me. My father's face went from pink to white in about 3 seconds. "Let me back up. My name is Hollis Marlowe. I'm 29 years old and I work as a forensic document examiner. I've spent the last 6 years authenticating signatures, identifying forged wills, and testifying in cases where someone tried to steal something from someone else by way of a pen. I've worked 62 cases. I've testified in 23 of them. 11 of those were in Hartford County, and 4 of those were in front of Judge Eleanor Whitcomb, the woman now staring down my father's attorney like a hawk that had just spotted a slow rabbit. My father didn't know any of this. He hadn't bothered to find out. We hadn't really spoken in 11 years. Here's what you need to understand about my father, Reed Marlowe. When I was 18, 2 months before my high school graduation, my father came home from a business trip with a woman who was not my mother. He sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that he had fallen in love and that he was leaving. My mother had died of ovarian cancer when I was 12, so it had just been the 2 of us for 6 years. I thought we were a team. He told me he and Camille were going to start over in Charleston, and that I was 18 now, and that I would understand when I was older. I did not understand when I was older. I'm older now, and I still don't. He sold our house. He didn't tell me until the realtor came to put up the sign. I had to move in with my grandfather, my mother's father. 3 weeks before graduation, my father went to my graduation, sat in the back, left before the reception. He sent me a card on my 19th birthday with $200 in it and a note that said, "Treat yourself." He didn't come to my college graduation. He didn't call when I got my certification. He didn't show up when I turned 25 and threw a small party at my grandfather's house. He sent another card, $200, same handwriting. I started a small drawer in my bedroom for those cards. By the time my grandfather died, there were 7 of them. I never spent $1 of that money. My grandfather, Wallace Pemberton, was a retired structural engineer who had spent 41 years designing bridges across New England. He was a quiet man with a soft voice and very steady hands. He kept his garage organized like a museum. Every screwdriver had its hook. Every drawer had a label he had typed himself on an old manual typewriter. He balanced his checkbook on the first Sunday of every month with a glass of iced tea, no sugar, lemon on the side. He used to tell me that good engineering wasn't about making things look impressive. It was about making sure nothing fell down when you needed it most. He raised me from 18 to 22 while I went to UConn and got my accounting degree. He paid for my certification program after I graduated. He never made me feel like I was a burden. Not once. He taught me how to look at a signature. He didn't know that's what he was doing. He used to show me the difference between his pen pressure when he was tired versus when he was alert. He'd point out the way my grandmother's signature changed in the years before her stroke. He showed me old letters from his father, an immigrant from Wales who barely spoke English but signed every single piece of paper that crossed his desk with the same careful, deliberate hand. My grandfather used to say that a person's signature was the closest thing to their soul that they ever put on paper. Pens don't lie, he told me. People lie. Pens just record. He died of a stroke in late August. He was 78. I was the one who found him, sitting in his recliner, the morning paper folded on his lap. The funeral was small, about 30 people. My father didn't come. He sent flowers. White lilies, the kind you order from a website without thinking. The card said, "With sympathy," and was signed by a florist. My grandfather left me everything. The house in West Hartford paid off worth around $410,000. his savings just over $200,000, a modest portfolio of railroad bonds his own father had bought in the 1950s, still earning small dividends, and his collection of mechanical watches, which he had been building since the early 70s. I knew the watches were valuable. I didn't know how valuable until later. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a letter from an attorney named Patrick Drummond. My father was contesting the will. I read the letter twice in my kitchen, then I sat down on the floor because my legs forgot how to work for a minute. According to the letter, my father claimed that my grandfather had been mentally compromised in the months before his death. He claimed that I had used my position as a live-in caretaker to manipulate a vulnerable elderly man. He claimed I had a documented history of substance abuse going back over a decade, and that I was therefore unfit to inherit, manage, or have any claim on the estate. He was petitioning the court to declare the will void and to have himself appointed as the proper heir, since my grandfather had no other living children. I want you to understand, my grandfather had no living children. My mother had been his only child. My father was not his son. My father was a man my grandfather had tolerated for the duration of my parents' marriage and had quietly disliked from the moment they returned from their honeymoon. The only legal claim my father could possibly have was through me, his daughter. But the petition wasn't trying to go through me. It was trying to go around me. The substance abuse claim was the part that made me laugh. Then I stopped laughing. When I was 19, in my freshman year of college, I had thrown my back out lifting a box of textbooks. I was prescribed a low-dose opioid for 10 days. That was the only opioid prescription I had ever filled. But somehow my father's attorney had medical records. He had pharmacy records. He was framing one 10-day prescription as the beginning of a lifelong addiction. He was going to use HIPAA-protected information against me, and he was going to do it by misrepresenting it. It got worse. The petition included a signed statement from my father's stepson, a man named Brooks, who I had met exactly twice in my life. Brooks claimed that he had observed me at family gatherings appearing intoxicated and emotionally unstable. The 2 times I had met him, I'd had 1 glass of wine at Thanksgiving and 1 beer at a 4th of July barbecue, both at events my father had pressured me to attend in my early 20s, before I gave up trying to be in his orbit. Brooks was 26 and worked at a bar in downtown Charleston. He had never had a real conversation with me. My father's wife, Camille Marlowe, did not sign a statement. I noticed that immediately. She had been in those same rooms. She could have lied for him too. She didn't. That was the first thread I started pulling. I called my friend Tessa, who's been my best friend since middle school and is now a public defender in Boston. She told me to hire a litigator immediately and not to talk to anyone, not even my father, especially not my father. She gave me the name of a woman named Dorothea Kessler. Dorothea was 61, sharp as a knife, and had spent 20 years prosecuting financial crimes in the U.S. Attorney's Office before going into private practice. She picked up on the second ring. She listened to me explain for 14 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. "What do you do for a living, Hollis?" I told her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice I will remember for the rest of my life, Oh, this is going to be fun. I want to pause here. If this story is hitting close to home for you, or you've ever had to fight for something that should have been yours by right, please consider subscribing. I read every comment. Tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now, back to it. The first thing Dorothea told me was that my father's case had a fatal weakness, and his attorney either didn't see it or didn't care. The probate court in Connecticut requires standing. To contest a will, you have to have a legal interest. My father had no direct relationship to my grandfather. His only path to standing was through his marriage to my mother, who had died 17 years ago. That meant his entire petition was built on the idea that the will was so improperly executed that the estate should default to intestate succession. And under intestate succession, with no living children, the estate would pass to me anyway since I was the only living grandchild. The only way for my father to win was to also have me declared incompetent, which is exactly what he was trying to do. Dorothea told me to give her 2 weeks. She said in the meantime, I should keep going to work, behave normally, and tell no one outside of a very small circle what was happening. She said she didn't want me to retain a private investigator yet. She said something about not wanting to spook anyone. I didn't ask what she meant. I trusted her. I went home to my grandfather's house that night and I started reading. He had kept everything, 41 years of correspondence, organized by year, labeled in his typewriter handwriting. I started with the most recent box because that was where my father would have appeared if he had appeared anywhere. He hadn't. There were no letters from my father in the last decade. There were, however, 3 letters from a name I had never seen before. A man named Whitfield Cross, with a return address in Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston is where my father lives. I opened the first letter dated 9 months before my grandfather's death. It was a polite, almost formal note from a man introducing himself as a financial advisor working with my father. He wrote that my father had asked him to reach out to my grandfather about a potential business opportunity that would benefit the family. He had included a brochure for something called the Coastal Heritage Trust. I had heard of Coastal Heritage Trust. I had testified in a case 3 years ago where Coastal Heritage Trust came up as a vehicle that had been used to move money out of the estates of 2 elderly men in Connecticut. The case had ended in a guilty plea. The man who ran it had gone to federal prison. Whitfield Cross was not the man who had gone to prison. Whitfield Cross was the man who had walked away. I sat on the floor of my grandfather's office, and I felt my hands start to shake. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt almost like grief, except it had teeth. The second letter was a follow-up, 3 months later, more pressing, asking for a phone meeting. The third letter, dated 6 weeks before my grandfather's death, was different. It was signed by my father. He had written it himself. He had asked my grandfather for a loan. He had said it was urgent. He had said that he was going through a hard time financially and that he didn't want me to know because he didn't want me to worry. He had asked for $150,000. He said it would be temporary. He said he would pay it back with interest. He had said, and this is the part that broke something in me, that my mother would have wanted him to be taken care of. There was no return letter from my grandfather in the file. But there was a notation on the back of my father's letter in my grandfather's careful typewriter handwriting on a small index card, paper clipped to the back. It said, asked R about debts. He lied, told him no. He got angry. My grandfather had refused him. 6 weeks before he died, my grandfather had refused to give my father $150,000 because my father had lied to him about why he needed it. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it matters. I did not call Dorothea. Not yet. I did not call my father. I did not call anyone. I went into my grandfather's bedroom. I sat down on the edge of his bed, and I cried for about 40 minutes. Not loud crying. The other kind? The kind where you feel like something has been hollowed out of you, and you don't know what's supposed to fill the empty space yet? I cried because my grandfather had spent the last 6 weeks of his life knowing that his son-in-law had tried to play him for a fool. I cried because my grandfather had not told me. He had wanted to protect me, and in the end I had to find out anyway, and I had to find out alone. Then I got up, I washed my face, I went back into the office, and I started taking pictures of every document with my phone, because that's what you do when you find evidence. You preserve it. You don't move it. You don't disturb the chain. The next morning, I called Dorothea and told her everything. She did something I had not heard her do before. She laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh a prosecutor makes when she sees a confession come in. She told me to stay home from work that day and to drive to her office. I did. We sat at her conference table for 4 hours. We made a plan. Here is what we knew. My father had been in financial trouble. The Coastal Heritage Trust connection suggested he had either been involved in fraud or had been a victim of it, and we needed to figure out which. My grandfather had refused him money. 6 weeks later, my grandfather was dead of a stroke that the doctors had said was likely caused by an undiagnosed clotting disorder. There was no foul play in the death. I want to make that clear. My grandfather died of natural causes. But my father had decided within 3 weeks of the funeral to claim the estate. Here is what we did not know yet. We did not know what my father had told Whitfield Cross. We did not know whether Camille knew any of this. We did not know about Brooks, and we did not know about the watches. The watches turned out to matter more than anyone expected. 2 days after my meeting with Dorothea, I got a phone call from my grandfather's longtime friend, a man named Russell, who had been in the engineering firm with him for 30 years. Russell told me he had been thinking about it for a while and had decided he should tell me. About 3 months before my grandfather died, my grandfather had asked Russell to drive him to a specialty appraiser in New Haven. He had wanted his watch collection appraised. The appraisal had come back at just over $300,000. There were 42 watches. 3 of them, one a Patek Philippe from 1962, were extremely rare. My grandfather had told Russell that he was getting his affairs in order, that he wanted me to know what I had so I would not be cheated. He had paid for the appraisal in cash and had taken the documentation home with him. Russell didn't know if I had found it. I had not found it. I went home that night and I went through the house room by room. I found it in the freezer, inside a Tupperware container labeled veggie soup. My grandfather had a sense of humor I had not always appreciated. The appraisal was in a manila envelope sealed with my name written on the front. There was also a handwritten note. 3 sentences. Hollis, your father will try. Don't let him. I called Dorothea at 9:15 at night. She answered on the first ring. I read her the note. She told me to bring everything to her office in the morning and to keep nothing in the house overnight that I couldn't replace. 5 days before the hearing, I drove down to a coffee shop in Stamford to meet a woman I had never met. Her name was Camille. She had reached out through Dorothea after Dorothea had sent a routine notice of the proceedings to all interested parties. She had asked quietly if she could speak to me alone before the hearing. My father's wife was not what I expected. She was in her late 50s, soft-spoken, with deep, tired eyes. She ordered hot tea and held the cup with both hands like she was cold. She told me she was sorry. She said it 3 times in the first 10 minutes. She said she had not known about the petition until 2 weeks ago. She said when she found out, she had asked my father to drop it. He had refused. She had asked Brooks to retract his statement. He had refused. She had Brooks to retract his statement. He had refused. She said she was not going to testify against my father because she still believed in something that resembled marriage, but she was also not going to lie for him. She had decided that she was going to leave him after the hearing was over, regardless of how it went. She didn't want me to think she was telling me this to look better. She was telling me because she had watched my grandfather welcome her into his home twice when she came up for the holidays years ago, even though she was the woman who had broken up his daughter's family and he had been kind to her anyway. She said he had been the only person in my father's life who had ever made her feel like she was being seen as a person rather than as a prize. She told me my father had been losing money for years. She told me he had borrowed against their house twice without telling her. She told me about Whitfield Cross and the Coastal Heritage Trust, and that my father had given that man $80,000 2 years ago and never seen a dime of it back. She said my father had become obsessed with my grandfather's estate around the time the IRS started sending letters. I asked her about Brooks. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she told me Brooks was not her son. Brooks was my father's biological son, from an affair he had during the early years of his marriage to my mother. Brooks was 26. He had been born when I was 3. My father had paid child support quietly through a lawyer for 2 decades. Camille had not known until after she married my father. She had agreed to act as a stepmother to him because she thought it was the kind thing to do. Brooks had grown up resentful, knowing he was a secret. He had been told, recently, that there might be a way for him to inherit something through his father. He had agreed to sign the statement. I want to tell you that this didn't hit me hard, but it did. I had a half-brother. I'd had one for 26 years. He had been told to lie about me to take something that wasn't his. I drove home that night, and I sat in the car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went in. I called Tessa. I told her everything. She said something I will not forget. She said something I will not forget. She said, "Hollis, none of this is about you. It has never been about you. This is about a man who never figured out how to want what he had, and who decided very early that the only way to get more was to take it. You're just standing in the way of him taking the last thing left." She was right. The night before the hearing, I drove to my grandfather's house. I sat in his recliner. I looked at the bookshelf where he kept his bridge engineering manuals. I thought about him refusing to give my father money. I thought about him driving to New Haven with Russell. I thought about him hiding an appraisal in a Tupperware container in the freezer because he knew. He knew exactly what was coming, and he had spent his last months of life making sure I would have what I needed. A signature is the closest thing to a soul a person puts on paper. Pens don't lie. In the morning, I put on the cardigan he had given me, and I drove to court. October 22nd, Hartford County Probate Court, 8:35 in the morning. I was early. Dorothea was already there. My father arrived at 9:01 in a navy suit that fit him too tightly across the shoulders. He looked older than I remembered. He didn't look at me. Brooks came in behind him, a thin young man with my father's chin and my own grandmother's nose, and the realization of how much of my own family was sitting on the wrong side of the room hit me harder than I expected. Camille did not come. I had not expected her to. Patrick Drummond, my father's attorney, was a man in his early 40s who looked deeply tired in a way that suggested he was not winning many cases. He gave his opening statement. He spoke for 15 minutes. He laid out the substance abuse claim. He laid out the alleged manipulation. He framed me as a young woman who had isolated a vulnerable elderly man for her own gain. He didn't mention what I did for a living. He didn't seem to know. When he finished, Judge Whitcomb asked my father if he wanted to make a personal statement. My father stood. He smoothed his tie. He spoke for about 3 minutes about his concern for me and his disappointment in my choices. Then he raised his voice and pointed at me and said that I was a drug addict and a manipulator, and that I had stolen the last years of his father-in-law's life. He said I should not be allowed to inherit a single thing. I did not look at him. I looked at Judge Whitcomb. I watched her face. I watched her listen to my father with the patient stillness of a woman who had heard 1,000 performances. Then I watched her turn slowly to Patrick Drummond and ask the question that started this story. "Counselor, are you certain you understand what your client's daughter does for a living?" Patrick blinked. He checked his notes. He said I was an accountant. Judge Whitcomb took her glasses off. She said, "She is a forensic document examiner. She has testified in this courtroom 4 times. She is one of the most reliable expert witnesses I have seen in 15 years on this bench. Are you sure, Counselor, that you wish to proceed with allegations that depend on document evidence?" The courtroom went silent. Dorothea stood. She did not give a long speech. She said, "Your Honor, we'd like to present the respondent's evidence." She started with the appraisal. She handed copies to the bailiff. She walked through the value of the watch collection, the timing of the appraisal, the location where it was found, and the handwritten note. She read the note aloud. 3 sentences. "Your father will try. Don't let him." Then she presented the letter from my father asking for the loan. She presented the index card with my grandfather's notation. She walked the court through the financial timeline, the IRS letters which she had subpoenaed, the bankruptcy filing my father had made 12 years ago and not disclosed, the $80,000 to Whitfield Cross, the connection to Coastal Heritage Trust, which Dorothea noted was already the subject of an ongoing federal investigation she had verified that morning with a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. My father's face went from white to something gray. Then Dorothea presented the medical records. She had obtained a certified copy of every prescription I had ever filled. There was one, 10 days. 10 years ago. She presented an affidavit from my primary care physician confirming I had no history of substance abuse, no flagged screenings, and a clean record across every standard panel for 6 consecutive years of annual physicals. Then she presented Brooks' statement alongside an affidavit from Camille Marlowe stating, on the record, that Brooks had not been present at the family events he claimed to have observed. Camille had attached her own contemporaneous photographs from those events. Brooks was not in any of them. Patrick Drummond requested a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. I watched Patrick walk over to my father. I watched him lean in. I watched his face as he explained what was happening. My father's mouth opened. He looked at me for the first time in 11 years. Really looked at me. I did not look away. I did not nod. I did not smile. I just looked back, the way my grandfather used to look at a beam he was checking for a hairline crack. When the court reconvened, Patrick stood and announced that his client wished to withdraw the petition. Judge Whitcomb shook her head. She said, given the evidence presented, she was not going to dismiss it quietly. She said she was forwarding the file to the state's attorney for review on charges of perjury, attempted fraud against an estate, and possible conspiracy. She said the federal investigation into Coastal Heritage Trust would receive a copy of the file as well. She denied the petition with prejudice. She looked at me briefly and gave me the smallest nod. It was over in less than 2.5 hours. No screaming, no theatrics, just a paper trail walked carefully end to end. The federal investigation moved fast. Within 6 weeks, my father was indicted on 4 counts related to the Coastal Heritage Trust matter, separate from the probate case. He had not just been a victim, he had been a recruiter. He had brought 2 other elderly men into the scheme, men who had lost their savings. He pleaded out and was sentenced to 7 years in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. He will be 67 when he is eligible for parole. Brooks was charged with perjury. He took a plea deal that included probation and 300 hours of community service. I do not know what has become of him. I have not tried to find out. Camille filed for divorce 2 weeks after the hearing. She moved back to her sister's place in Tennessee. She sent me a short letter at Christmas. I sent one back. I do not know if we will ever speak again, but I am glad she exists. My grandfather's estate was settled by January. I kept the house. I could not bring myself to sell it. I work from there sometimes now. I sit at his kitchen table with his old electric percolator going, and I look at signatures and I think about him. The watches went into a safe deposit box at a bank he used for 40 years. I have not sold any of them. I do not think I ever will. They were his way of telling me he saw me, and I want to keep being seen. I met a man named Hollis Bell 6 months after the hearing. We laughed about the name overlap on our first date. He's a high school chemistry teacher. He is steady in the exact way my grandfather always told me to look for. He proposed in September in front of the bridge in Middletown that my grandfather had helped engineer in 1986. I said yes. We are getting married in the spring. I want to tell you something before I go. People will tell you that revenge is anger, that it eats you up, that it turns you into the thing you hate. I don't think they're right. I think there is a kind of stillness you can find when you decide that you are going to let the truth do the work. My father shouted in that courtroom. I sat. He pointed. I waited. He lied. I had documents. He thought I was the same girl he had left at a kitchen table with a card and $200, and he forgot that the man who raised me after he left had spent 41 years making sure things didn't fall down. If you're listening to this and someone in your life has decided you are easy to take from, I want you to remember something. Keep your receipts. Keep your records. Save your letters. Note your dates. Be quiet when you need to be quiet, and let the paper do what paper does. People can twist any story they want about you, but pens don't lie. Pens just record. And in the end, the record is what stands up in court when everything else has fallen away. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. If it meant something to you, please subscribe and leave a comment. There's another story waiting for you on your screen right now. I'll see you there. I think about that morning in Hartford County more than I expected to. Not the verdict. Not even the part where my father's face went gray. I think about the cardigan, the one my grandfather Wallace gave me 3 Christmases before he died. I wore it because it was warm, but I also wore it because I needed him with me, and that cardigan was the closest I could get. I've come to believe that what we choose to carry into our hardest rooms tells us who we already are. Here is what I've learned, and I say this as a woman who used to flinch at her own last name. Nothing in that courtroom happened by accident. My father lost because of choices he made over decades, not because of one bad day on a witness stand. He chose to leave when I was 18. He chose to lie to my grandfather about a loan. He chose to bring his own son into a perjury scheme rather than face what he had become. Every one of those choices was a small deposit into an account that came due in front of Judge Whitcomb. Cause and effect doesn't wait politely for us to be ready. It just keeps the books. I won because of choices too, not flashy ones. My grandfather chose to teach me how to look at a signature when I was 12 and bored on a rainy Sunday. He chose to drive to New Haven with his friend Russell to get those watches appraised when his hands were already getting tired. He chose to write 3 sentences on a note and hide it in a Tupperware container in the freezer because he trusted that I would look. None of those moments felt important when they happened. All of them held me up when I needed holding. I want to tell you what I think character actually is, because I had it wrong for a long time. I used to think character was about being good in the dramatic moments. It isn't. Character is built in the dull ones. It's the receipts you keep when no one is watching. It's the rage you don't act on. It's the calls you don't return because you know yourself well enough to know you'd say something you'd regret. My grandfather had character because he balanced his checkbook on the first Sunday of every month for 40 years. Not because he was brave on a witness stand. He was never on a witness stand. He didn't need to be. Intelligence isn't what they tell you either. It isn't being the smartest person in the room. It's being patient enough to let the room reveal itself. I sat through my father's opening statement. I sat through his shouting. I let him commit, fully and on the record, to a story he could not back out of. That wasn't cleverness. It was discipline. The two are not the same. And resilience, the third thing, is just the willingness to keep showing up after you've been hollowed out. I cried on my grandfather's bed for 40 minutes the night I found that letter. Then I got up and washed my face. That's all it was. That's all it ever is. You don't have to feel strong. You just have to stand up one more time than the person who is trying to break you. If I leave you with anything, let it be this. Be the kind of person who keeps the receipts. Quiet, careful, and impossible to dismiss.